Hi everyone, my name is Barkha Dutt and you're watching the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive every day into the big stories of the day and the issues that really matter, going deeper than all mainstream media. On the program today, we'll be decoding India's 2 approved vaccines and looking at the rollout with somebody who's an expert in her domain. We'll be bringing a very special newsmaker to answer all of your questions, your queries and your doubts, and to understand from her why there has been so much controversy around this approval and what might be the most effective way to roll out the vaccine. I'm talking today about our newsmaker, the chairperson of Biocon, an expert for many, many years now in this field, someone who understands this subject better than anybody else, Kiran Shaw. Kiran, pleasure as always having you on the program. A very warm welcome. Let me start by asking you, as someone who's a woman of science, have you been disturbed by the entire controversy around Covaxin versus Covishield, biotech versus the Serum Institute? And for you, are these 2 approved vaccines at par?
So let me answer this question in a very, very different way, Barkha. First and foremost, I think there needs to be a very, very articulate explanation of why this confusion has been set free in our society. And I think I would like to start by saying that when we look at vaccines, what is it that we need to look for? Safety is paramount. I think immunogenic response is extremely important to assess the efficacy of vaccines. And ultimately, you have to basically, assess efficacy. And what do you mean by efficacy? Efficacy really means how long are you protected for? So the debate we are having today really revolves around efficacy. Because if you look at both these vaccines have actually demonstrated safety and immunogenicity of the desirable level. Now, if you look at the 2 vaccines, you can see that the Serum Institute of India actually conducted a bridging study on 1,600 people to make sure that the safety and immunogenicity of the vaccine being developed in India or produced in India matches the safety and immunogenicity profile of the global vaccine that was developed by or manufactured and developed by AstraZeneca. Now, in terms of efficacy data, the Serum Institute vaccine is depending on the efficacy data provided by the global study by AstraZeneca.
Right.
Now, the global study of AstraZeneca, as you know, had various kind of anomalies because, they had conducted a faulty trial on a small cohort of patients, which gave them 90% efficacy. Then they took the efficacy data of a larger trial that they had conducted in Brazil, South Africa, and UK with the right kind of dosage, and they got 62% efficacy. And I think it was basically wrong for them to average the 2 and say it was 70%, because that's not the way to do it.
Okay, that's an important point. Can I ask you to actually elaborate on that point a little bit? You're saying that the efficacy of 70% that has actually been claimed by the Serum Institute vaccine is not correct because it's the aggregate of 2 different kinds of doses, correct?
Yeah. So the treatment regimen of 1.5 doses for one, which gave 90, and the treatment regimen of 2 full doses, which gave 62%, cannot be averaged into 70% by any kind of statistical means. So basically, I think you have to go with one or the other. And in this case, since most of the data is being looked at as the data provided by the larger study, then you have to go by the 62% efficacy, which is fine because it crosses the 50% threshold that the regulators around the world have agreed to and WHO has agreed to. But the big question mark is, please understand that when you look at efficacy under normal circumstances, this efficacy is normally looked at least for a period of 1 year. Now, why do we do that? Is because we want to know in a 1 year period, how many people get reinfected and how many people are remain protected. So
Yeah.
when you 50%, you are saying that 50% of the people remain protected. And that is considered to be a pretty good threshold for any vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say it's 90% efficacious, we are only talking about a 4 week data, by the way.
Yeah.
So all you are saying that is in 4 weeks you are protected. 90% of the people are protected by the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, and by this cohort of patients in the AstraZeneca vaccine who got that 1.5 dose. But that 62% of the patients got protected in the AstraZeneca larger cohort. Okay, that's
Yeah.
what it means. But we don't know what these numbers will look like 1 year down the line. Will that 90% reduce to 50%? Will that 90% reduce to 70%?
Can
Or
you
will it
can you
take
just
that
can you
time?
explain what is efficacy in one line? First, for people who don't know, what is efficacy?
So efficacy is really the extent of protection of the vaccine in a population. So
Yeah.
if assuming that 100 people take a vaccine, and if 50% of the people still remain protected, which means they
Yeah.
don't get infected, then it means it's a 50% efficacy. And that is
Right.
a pretty large acceptable level. So what happens is today you are basically only focused on efficacy, 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 which
Mm-hmm.
certainly the AstraZeneca does have. You have, at least they provided the 62% efficacy.
Yeah.
And combining that with the safety and immunogenicity data provided by Serum Institute, the regulator has said, okay, my judgment call is you can approve this vaccine under
Right.
emergency use.
Right.
Now comes the Bharat Biotech vaccine. The
Yeah.
Bharat Biotech vaccine has shown immunogenicity and safety not just in the 800 people that came under the phase 1, phase 2, but
Yeah.
also 22,000 people who have received 1 dose and 3,000 people who have received 2 doses. So from a safety point of view, Covaxin is very safe.
Yeah.
And as far as immunogenicity is concerned, they have
Mm-hmm.
actually demonstrated good immunogenicity in terms of neutralizing antibodies and T cell response in
Yeah.
800 subjects who went through the phase 1, phase 2 trials. So I
Right.
think from immunogenicity point of view, also the judgment call taken is that it has got good demonstrated immunogenicity. So
Mm-hmm.
based on that, what they did was they basically extrapolated the data of neutralizing antibodies and T cell response,
Yeah.
my assumption of the subject expert committee, and they have then said that this should pass the 50% threshold that is
Mm-hmm.
required for efficacy in that 4 week period.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the judgment call they made to
Yeah.
approve this vaccine under an emergency use approval. But they also introduced a caveat saying that since we really don't have the efficacy data on the Covaxin vaccine, we
Yeah.
would like you to give this to participants under what they called as a clinical setting, which means
Yeah.
they are saying that you need consent and you should follow up those
Yeah.
subjects.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. So the difference between the Serum Institute approval and the Bharat Biotech approval is that in the Serum Institute vaccine, you don't need to give consent, you don't need to be followed up. You can just go and take your vaccine under
Yeah.
the normal course. Whereas in the Bharat Biotech's case, you have to give consent, which they will have to submit to the authorities, and you will have to also make sure that you're agreeable to being followed up.
Okay, you've given us a lot of information, and what I want to do is break it down into very simple layperson language. So let's first start with what you've said about efficacy. You are explaining, Kiran Shaw, that the efficacy of a vaccine in a normal situation in peacetime would take a year. So, for any efficacy numbers that are being claimed by anybody, Pfizer, Moderna, Serum Institute, Oxford-AstraZeneca, this we do not know whether it will actually hold for a year. And efficacy, quite simply, is your odds of getting reinfected. In other words, you believe that the focus on efficacy is misplaced and not correct. Am I reading you right?
Well, largely right, because I'm saying that the numbers and the data we are looking at is for a very short period of time, which is a 4-week period, which is normally not done. So
Right.
is that the right number is what I'm asking.
Okay. The second thing you've said is that you believe that for Serum Institute and the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine to aggregate a half dose, on the 1.5 dose model is wrong because these are two unconnected data points. And therefore, the 90% number is not something you're comfortable with. You believe that they need to go back then to another trial to claim the 90% efficacy?
Yeah. So I think US FDA has clearly said that if you want to establish that it is indeed 90% with 1.5, you'll have to do a full trial. You can't give me 3,000 people trial and say that this is to be approved. They say you have to do a larger trial to convince us that this indeed is the hypothesis which you have demonstrated. Similarly, Europe is not willing to approve the present trial because they said, you have not really met any of the endpoints that you had started with, and you have gone
Sure.
and changed your trial. And now, if you want to get full approval, come with a clean set of data points.
Okay, now let's come to Bharat Biotech, where the maximum noise has been around the fact that no efficacy data was put in the public domain at all for phase 3 trials. And you had, people like your friend Gagandeep Kang, very well regarded scientist, saying she would not take the Covaxin because this is unprecedented. You're disagreeing and you're saying the focus on efficacy is wrong for this time, for this situation.
No, my point is that, look, I think every regulator around the world is making judgment calls, okay? These judgment calls are made on either extremely abbreviated pathways, which are called warp speed pathways, which
That's
is
right.
unprecedented because it's an unprecedented situation.
Yeah.
And there are others who are making judgment calls based on extrapolation of data. Like, the Chinese have done, like even the MHRA has done a judgment call because they've had to basically do a post hoc analysis and go with that judgment saying, okay, we are willing to approve it. So I think every regulator has made a judgment call on either Chinese vaccines or Russian vaccines and now even Indian vaccines. So I don't think under these kind of times of emergency, health issues and these kind of unprecedented times that you can fault any one regulator and call them out, because all of them are trying to make judgment calls to protect their populations. So I think, we need to look at it in that way. And as far as I am concerned, if a vaccine has demonstrated immunogenicity based on neutralizing antibodies and T cell response, if a vaccine has demonstrated a pretty convincing safety data, then I think you can be allowed to extrapolate and assume that it'll cross the 50% threshold in that 4-week period which they have now agreed to. And the thing is that the Indian regulator has also insisted that you actually do this trial, deliver this vaccine in almost a clinical trial setting. So that's the caveat they've given. And it's up to anyone to decide whether they want that vaccine or not. Today, if you remember, the vaccine is voluntary. It's not mandated. So
you're comfortable? Are you comfortable, therefore, with the clinical trial mode approval to Bharat Biotech? Are you comfortable with it?
Yes, I'm fine with it, because I think really at this point in time, it's not fair to make such judgment calls on any vaccine. For that matter, you can say that even the Serum Institute vaccine has been done on very few people in India. Okay? They are relying on a global set of data points. And therefore, I think there are so many, contradictions in everything we are doing that I would go by the general kind of judgment that I would use for a vaccine of this type, because there are so many unknowns and uncertainties. So I would base my, judgment on the immunogenicity and the safety, which therefore I personally would take either of these vaccines.
That's what I was going to ask you, and let me ask you that exactly that.
But the only challenge for people will be that if you are now going to be told that, okay, you can take the Bharat Biotech vaccine, but you have to be followed up, then people might say, I don't want to be followed up, let me use the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's the only reason. But
So,
I think the data from Bharat Biotech on efficacy also will come very, very soon. So I'm sure that once that comes, all these concerns and debates and discussions will be put aside, because I'm quite confident that it will pass the efficacy threshold.
at the moment, the main difference between the two, again, to summarize you simply, is that for one, you can register, and like provided you're eligible and you're in the first sort of set of people who can get it, you can register and get the vaccine. But for the Bharat Biotech vaccine, because it's in clinical trial mode, I will have to fill in a consent form. Am I correct? And then my case will be followed up.
Yeah, exactly correct, Barkha. And
Yeah.
I would say that by the time you and I are eligible for the vaccine, all the data that you need to know about efficacy will be out.
Okay. Are you concerned, because you started by saying that there should have been better articulation of all of this? Now, what's happening is that anti-vaxxers, rumor mongers, conspiracy theorists are going to step into this space. You do not believe the regulator has made a mistake, but perhaps the one mistake he did make was to not take questions. If he had taken questions at his press conference, maybe this confusion wouldn't have arisen. Point one. Point two, when ordinary Indians hear, Dr. Ella of Bharat Biotech saying paracetamol was given in the AstraZeneca trial, and they hear other Poonawala saying, Bharat Biotech is safe, but just safe like water. What do ordinary Indians make of this?
I think that was unnecessary, Barkha. I don't think such comments should have been made. And I really think that, yes, I think the drug regulator, the DCGI, ought to have taken some questions to clarify some of these concerns, and all this could have been prevented. So I'm very sad that this has come to this kind of a controversy. It should not have been. It should have been a proud moment for India that 2 vaccines have been approved, and that people are feeling, elated and confident now that, there will be return to normalcy soon. So unfortunately, all this has happened, but I, for one, believe we need to now move on.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to do that, with their joint statement as well. So let's actually start taking a few questions that are coming on our screens that are about the science, and that's what really matters at the moment. Assuming some of the recipients are given Covaxin before the phase 3 trials efficacy data comes out, and subsequently, if the trial results show a low efficacy, say it's below 50%, will they be vaccinated with other vaccines then?
Well, they can certainly be revaccinated with other vaccines.
Yeah. And
so,
there won't be a problem with that?
Let's not assume these kind of things, but certainly I just want you to know that the difference between adenoviral vector vaccines and the Bharat Biotech inactivated whole virion vaccine is that once you're vaccinated with an adenoviral vector vaccine, and supposing that does not pan out in terms of durability of response, then you cannot take another adenoviral vector vaccine. You will have to actually take the Bharat Biotech vaccine. Okay. But yes, if the Bharat Biotech vaccine fails, you can certainly take an adenoviral vector vaccine. In fact, if you know, in the UK, they've even come up with another model where they're saying you can mix and match vaccines, and you can also maybe take the AstraZeneca vaccine after 3 months. And of course, US FDA is absolutely not agreeing with this. So you can see how each regulator is making judgment calls. Some of it definitely stands to good scientific reasoning. But the debate we are having right now is not about just the scientific reasoning. We are having this big debate on clinical trial protocols. So there's a big difference between saying, have you followed protocol or are you using scientific judgment? I think that's where the real debate is. And I, for one, would say, let's follow the science. I think if you follow the science, a lot of answers can be found.
Okay, the next question for you. The question for Ms. Kiran Shaw is efficacy of a vaccine based on illness or infection? Disease or infection, I think, is what the questioner means.
Well, let me put it this way. Efficacy right now is based on infection. Okay, the way efficacy is assessed is based on infection. But obviously, you know that infection leads to illness if it is severe. Okay. So what we are hoping is that even if you test positive, like, let me explain to the viewers how efficacy is measured. So the way efficacy is measured, and that too, each vaccine is doing its own thing. That's another problem, Barkha.
Yeah.
Moderna and Pfizer are only testing symptomatic patients, okay, for COVID.
Okay.
And they are reporting the 90% based on the symptomatic patients who have tested positive, okay,
Okay. Okay.
or negative. Now you have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which actually is the right way of doing it. Every 2 weeks, they are putting all their people on a RT-PCR test.
Yeah.
And they are reporting both asymptomatic and symptomatic people who have tested positive. And they are testing it over a 4-week period. So what is happening is that when you say it's 62%, it
Yeah.
means that the 38%, both asymptomatic and symptomatic, tested positive in that cohort. Okay. So what
Yeah.
they do is that they look at the number of people who tested positive. Let me also explain a little more. The people who tested positive are being put into one cohort, and you'll see how many are on placebo and how many are on the
Actual dosage. Yeah.
on the vaccine, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you say 62%, it means that there was a cohort of, say, for example, 100 people who tested positive, out of which 62 people were on the vaccine arm and 38 people were on the on the placebo arm. That's how you say 62% efficacy.
Correct.
So that's how you test efficacy, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Sure. But the questions still remain. What people are going to keep saying is, so what you're basically saying, Kiran, is that the vaccine is
And
safe,
one more
but they
thing.
may not be effective.
No,
The
no.
vaccines are
One more
safe,
thing.
but they may not be effective. That's where we are.
One more caveat I want to add to that
Yeah.
is also what they found in the AstraZeneca and many other cases is that even if they have tested positive,
Yeah.
nobody went to the hospital. That is what they are
Okay.
also doing. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
even if they tested positive in their test, into the RT-PCR test, what they are also saying is, but none of these people went to the hospital, which means they all had very mild cases of COVID, which were completely resolved in a very short time.
Okay. Okay.
So
But
that was also to show the effectiveness of the vaccine.
But am I correct in saying that basically we know that these vaccines are safe, that they have shown positive results on immunogenicity, but we do not yet know how effective they are or how long lasting they are in their efficacy, which means we don't right now know, will we need this vaccine every 3 months, every year?
We don't know that.
We don't know.
Know that, because right now we have no idea whether it will last for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year, or forever. That we don't know. So
Yeah.
until time, until time kind of passes and we get more data, you won't know how long these will last.
So
That's what I'm saying. When you look at the efficacy data on 4 weeks, is that a number we are really comfortable with? Don't you want to be protected more than 4 weeks? I mean, today,
which of the 4 vaccines would you take?
no, I think, with no known data on durability of response, every vaccine is fine. What I am trying to say is that today, AstraZeneca is also saying that, by the way, when you take my first dose, you can be protected for 3 months. We can then give you the second dose after 3 months. But these are all anecdotal kind of interpretations based on cohorts and subset analysis. So unless you do a proper trial, you really don't know what is the durability of response.
Okay, so I think we've understood a lot. At least I have, for the first time, understood what the efficacy of a vaccine actually is. I want to move to who should get the vaccine, because you're basically saying at the moment, a lot of people may choose the AstraZeneca over the Bharat Biotech for one reason alone, that Bharat Biotech at the moment requires a consent form and a follow-up. That could change. It could change in a few weeks. It could change in a couple of months, once the efficacy data of the phase 3 trials has been placed. So that I've understood.
And if the efficacy data looks really good, then people might even opt for the Bharat Biotech vaccine.
Fair enough. Now let's come to how the rollout should happen. And I know that you have some sort of deeply thought views on this, some unconventional views on this that are challenging some of the assumptions. Let's come to the key question. Other than health workers and frontline workers, that's a no-brainer. Who should be in line to get this vaccine?
So, Barkha, the conventional thinking is that you need to stratify the population based on whom we think need the vaccine first,
Yeah,
which are, as you mentioned, the healthcare workers, the essential workers, the elderly, the people with comorbidities. It makes a lot of logical sense. But
yeah,
then the question I want to ask you is that, look, you have to give two doses.
yeah,
So essentially and effectively, you are not really protected between the two doses, right? So if
yeah,
an elderly person who stays at home, and who really, in India, really most elderly people are pretty sedentary. They don't keep going out to parties and
yeah,
start congregating with people or whatever.
yeah,
So these elderly people generally are very sedentary, and supposing they get their first dose, but they
yeah.
are staying with family members and young people who have not been vaccinated. Now, don't you think they are the ones who can actually infect this elderly person if they don't get vaccinated themselves? So it doesn't make sense to just vaccinate one member in the family and not vaccinate the others in the family. That to me is the first illogical way of approaching it. Secondly,
Okay.
if you saw today's announcement, I've forgotten who made the announcement, but somebody from the health ministry made an announcement saying that, okay, we will like to open up schools, but we need to make sure that the teachers are vaccinated and that the parents are vaccinated. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to then justify that all school going children parents will be allowed to be vaccinated even if they are below that or if they are not in that priority category, but
Yeah.
others will not be allowed to be vaccinated? I mean, it's a bit of a mishmash, right? And
Mm.
then if you say schools can operate, then you'll say even colleges can open. Then the
Mm.
colleges, you'll say now that students have to be
So
vaccinated,
what's the
and their
solution,
parents
Kiran?
also have to be vaccinated. So, I really think this is going a bit too far. We've already seen that even in a country like America, where they were supposed to vaccinate 20 million people in December, they were only able to vaccinate 2 million, which means 10%. And
Yeah.
today, if you listen to a lot of discussions on CNN and other US channels, TV channels, you will find the reason why this is happening is because, like us, they have gone and stratified their vaccination, population on all these prioritization basis, and it is proving to be a very tedious, bureaucratic, slow process. And
Yeah.
in fact, they themselves are thinking of now being flexible and opening it up. Similarly, I think we also need to look at having a much more flexible model,
Yeah.
whether it is a 80-20, whether it is a 60-40, whether it is a 50-50, whatever percentage that the government comes up with, you should allow a small percentage to be deployed to the general population. Then only will the speed of vaccination accelerate. Open it up to the private sector, because like in the RT-PCR testing case, as long as the
Mhm.
government was handling it, we were woefully short of testing. It was
Right.
slow, and because of lack of capacity, it was also slowing down even further. The moment private sector got into it, there was huge capacity expansion. The number of tests got ramped up, and market forces also drove down the prices. So I
Mhm.
think here also the vaccines which will be deployed in the private sector ought to be price controlled. And anyway, you have a COVID, app
Yeah.
which the private sector must be mandated to use, so that anyone vaccinated, their data can be uploaded onto a common ICMR database or a health ministry database.
Yeah. So you're basically saying that involve the private sector, A, B, keep a percentage for general population who does not tick the box on vulnerable population. And this, in part, the focus should be on working population. For example, who do you classify as at the front line, right? Doctors, health workers, of course. But what about delivery boys? Let's take Zomato and Swiggy
Yeah.
delivery boys, for example.
Yeah, Barkha, I mean, they are as exposed and vulnerable to the virus as
Yeah.
sort of a lab technician in a dental clinic, you know, or
Yeah.
a municipal worker sweeping the streets of the town. So I think you cannot differentiate between these people. Who is more important? Who is more essential? Who is more vulnerable? These are discussions that are not fair, is what I'm saying. So I just feel that you need flexibility in this model. And I think the government ought to, look at this flexibility very rapidly, involve the private sector to, expand capacity and speed of delivery, and make sure that you have some regulations that don't allow black marketing, don't allow any other kind of misconduct.
Now, just we have a couple of minutes left with you. There's one comment on the screen: when we can hold general elections on such a vast scale, why not vaccination with the help of the private sector? We forget that India already makes 60% of the world's vaccines. So when we're sitting here being doubting Thomases, I think we have to remember that India's track record on vaccine manufacturing is quite good. That said, Kiran, there are people who are still concerned because of this confused communication that has taken place. So in the end, I'm going to take one more question just on that. Joseph Vinod says, Kiran Shaw, Professor Gagandeep Kang said the confusion is, what does the drug controller mean by clinical trial use approval? Either you are doing a clinical trial or you're not. So why rush the approval if it's still in clinical trial mode? This for Bharat Biotech, of course.
Yeah, I think basically the articulation of how the Bharat Biotech vaccine was approved was not properly explained, according to me. Yeah. What they're basically saying is what I said before. What they mean is that they want you to be followed up. Since they still don't have efficacy data, they feel that you can generate more data by giving the vaccine without a placebo control to larger number of people. It's like an open label study. That is what we call it in clinical jargon, but which people can have access to. So that's what is meant by that.
Okay, as we close, is there something that concerns you? What right now? For example, there are questions, people are saying, vaccine nationalism. Has the push for a Swadeshi vaccine made the government act in haste? Do you believe, communication, we've already said that, there should have been better articulation. Do you believe anything is happening in haste, it's cutting corners? Or do you believe that the world over, some corners are being cut because you're in war, not at peace?
Well, Barkha, let's be honest. There is vaccine nationalism everywhere in the world. Why are you only faulting us here? I mean, there's been vaccine nationalism in the US, there's vaccine nationalism in the UK, there's vaccine nationalism in China, Russia, you name it. So what's wrong? I mean, we have vaccines and we want those vaccines to be deployed. Every country wants vaccines to be deployed in its population. So nothing wrong with that kind of vaccine nationalism. And I don't think it's fair to just target India for that.
Secondly, any concerns? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I don't think there are any concerns that I have in terms of the way they were approved, because every part of the world has approved vaccines in a very abbreviated fashion. Now, you can always sort of nitpick and say this was done better than this, but by and large, it hasn't followed due protocol in the normal sense of the word. So from that point of view, it's a judgment call people are making on science, not on the clinical format.
I get that. Now, I have to close with one last question. You have, in fact, been COVID positive and you have recovered. And I think you're an example of what the new normal is, that we may have to mask up and live. And by the way, we are going to have to mask up even after the vaccines, because we could still be carriers even if we don't get the disease. So as a COVID positive patient, someone who's COVID recovered rather, would you take the vaccine, Kiran?
Yes, I would, because, I don't know for how long I am protected. Right? Yeah. Because even though I've had COVID and a lot of people have had COVID, you also heard of a lot of cases of reinfection, right? So we don't know how long you're protected for. I could be protected for a long time, but I don't know. And there's nothing wrong in me taking a jab of vaccine to boost my immunity, because that's pretty good, because, it doesn't do me any harm. It will only do me good.
Well, thank you for this very non-hysterical, educative, informative conversation. In fact, that's the last comment on the screen. Extremely informative discussion. Thank you, Ms. Kiran Shaw, is our viewer writing in to say that. Kiran Shaw, thank you so much. Pleasure as always. Very, very educative. And we'll bring you back on the Mojo story as the vaccine rollout actually takes place. And that should be the good news of 2021. So we look forward to that. Thank you, Kiran.